My name is Beverly, and I'm 58 years old. As a retired French teacher, language has always been my window to the world. When my son William finally brought home the woman he wanted to marry, I was overjoyed until I heard what she whispered to her parents in French. She called me an ugly old cow and revealed her plan to marry my son for his green card, then divorce him for his inheritance. I sat there smiling, pretending not to understand a word. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Sometimes knowing when to stay silent reveals more truth than speaking ever could. After 15 years as a widow, I've grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of life alone. My husband Robert passed away from pancreatic cancer when our son William was just finishing college. The diagnosis came suddenly, and within 6 months, I found myself planning a funeral instead of our 30th anniversary celebration. That was a dark time, but somehow life continues whether you're ready or not. I live in a beautiful brownstone in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood that has been in my family for generations. My great-grandparents purchased it in 1902, and it's passed down through the women in our family ever since. With its bay windows, ornate moldings, and the small garden out back where I grow herbs and flowers during our brief New England summers, it's more than just a house to me. It's the physical embodiment of my family's history. For 30 years, I taught French language and literature at Boston University. My love affair with the French language began when I was just 10 years old, and my parents took me to Paris for the summer. Something about the melodic flow of the words, the culture, the art captivated me completely. I later returned to study at the Sorbonne for 2 years in my 20s, and even after returning to America, I maintained my fluency and accent. My students often said I spoke French like a native Parisian. William is my only child, the center of my universe since the day he was born. He has his father's height and strong jaw, but my blue eyes and fair complexion. Always brilliant, he graduated from Harvard Law School and now works as a partner at a prestigious firm in New York City. I'm immensely proud of him, though I wish he lived closer to Boston. These days we see each other only every few months, our relationship maintained through weekly phone calls and video chats. For years I worried about William's romantic life. He dated occasionally, but his demanding career seemed to consume him, leaving little time for meaningful relationships. At 39, he was still single, married to his legal briefs and court appearances. Every mother wants to see her child happy and settled, and I was no different, though I tried not to pressure him about it. That's why I felt such joy when William called me on a Sunday evening 6 months ago, his voice vibrating with excitement. "Mom, I've met someone. Her name is Colette. She's from France, working here on a temporary visa with an international law firm. We've been dating for 4 months, and well, I've asked her to marry me." I nearly dropped the phone. 4 months. That seems rather quick, doesn't it? "When you know," he said, brushing aside my concern. "She's incredible, Mom. Smart, beautiful, sophisticated. I can't wait for you to meet her." Despite my reservations about the speed of their relationship, I was genuinely happy for William. He described Colette with such admiration, telling me about her upbringing in Lyon, her legal education, and her love of classical music and fine art. She sounded perfectly suited to my thoughtful, cultured son. "Her parents are visiting from France next month," William continued. "We'd like to bring them to Boston to meet you. Maybe you could host us all for dinner." "Of course," I agreed immediately. "I'd love that." After we hung up, I began planning the perfect evening. I would prepare coq au vin, my specialty, along with ratatouille and a chocolate soufflé for dessert. I wanted to impress Colette and her parents with authentic French cuisine while making them feel welcome. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I transformed my home. I had the carpets professionally cleaned, polished the silver that had been in my family for generations, and arranged fresh flowers throughout the house. I even reframed some of William's childhood photos to display on the piano. Perhaps it was excessive, but I wanted everything to be perfect for this momentous occasion. The day before their arrival, I received another call from William. "Mom, I forgot to mention that Colette's parents don't speak much English. Her father knows a few phrases for business, and her mother knows even less." "Don't worry," I assured him. "We'll manage just fine." I decided not to mention my fluency in French right away. Sometimes it's interesting to observe people when they don't realize you understand them. Not that I expected anything negative, but years of teaching had taught me that people reveal their true selves when speaking in their native tongue, believing others can't understand. The evening of the dinner arrived, and I found myself adjusting and readjusting the table settings, checking the oven repeatedly, and changing my outfit 3 times. Finally, I settled on a navy blue dress with a single strand of pearls Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look elegant, but not as if I was trying too hard. At precisely 6:30, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and went to welcome the people who might one day become my extended family. The moment I opened the door, I was struck by Colette's beauty. She had glossy dark hair cut in a fashionable bob, high cheekbones, and striking amber eyes. Dressed in a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, she exuded sophistication and confidence. "Beverly, finally we meet," Colette exclaimed, air-kissing both my cheeks with practiced precision. Her English was excellent, with just enough of an accent to sound charming rather than difficult to understand. "William has told me so much about you." William beamed beside her, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. My son had always been handsome, but he seemed to glow in Colette's presence. He placed his hand protectively on the small of her back and said, "Mom, this is Colette Dupont, my fiancée." There was something about her smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but I dismissed it as nervousness. Meeting your future mother-in-law is stressful for anyone. "And these are my parents," Colette continued, gesturing to the couple behind her. "Monsieur and Madame Dupont." Monsieur Dupont was a tall, stern-looking man with silver hair and an expensive watch that he seemed to check every few minutes. Madame Dupont was thin and elegant, with the same amber eyes as her daughter, and a perpetual expression of mild disdain. They nodded curtly as Colette introduced us. "Enchanted," Monsieur Dupont said stiffly in heavily accented English, shaking my hand with barely concealed reluctance. Madame Dupont merely nodded her eyes, sweeping across my foyer, with an appraising look that made me feel as though my home was being evaluated and found wanting. "Please come in," I said warmly, determined not to let their coolness affect me. "Dinner is almost ready. Would you like some wine while we wait?" As we moved into the living room, Colette exclaimed over everything she saw. "Oh, what a charming home, so typically American, and these antiques must have such history. William told me you are a teacher." I replied, pouring glasses of Bordeaux for everyone. "I taught for 30 years before retiring." "How lovely," Colette said without asking what subject I taught. "Teaching must be so rewarding, though I imagine the salary is quite modest." There was something condescending in her tone, but William didn't seem to notice. "Mom was a professor, actually," he corrected gently, "at Boston University." "Of course," Colette said smoothly. "How interesting." Colette wandered around my living room, picking up family photographs and examining them with what seemed like excessive interest. "William was such an adorable child, and this house has been in your family for generations. How fortunate." There was something calculating in the way she assessed my home, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what bothered me. Perhaps I was being overly sensitive. After all, this woman would be my son's wife. When we moved to the dining room, Colette effusively praised the meal I'd prepared. "Coq au vin, my favorite. You must have gone to so much trouble." Yet I noticed she barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate more than eating it. Throughout the meal, I observed subtle glances between Colette and her parents, a silent communication I couldn't decipher. William, completely enamored, didn't notice anything amiss. He proudly told stories about their whirlwind romance, how they met at an international law conference in Manhattan. "It was like something from a movie," he said, taking Colette's hand across the table. I saw her across the room and couldn't look away. "Yes, it was quite the coincidence that we were both there," Colette agreed, giving him an adoring look that somehow seemed practiced to me. "Coincidence indeed," Monsieur Dupont murmured in heavily accented English, exchanging a quick glance with his wife. William continued talking about their relationship, oblivious to the undercurrents I was beginning to sense. He mentioned Colette's temporary work visa, how they were rushing the wedding to ensure she could stay in the country legally. "We're thinking just a small ceremony," William said, though Colette deserves a fairy tale wedding. Nonsense, darling, Colette interjected. I just want to be with you, though I admit I have always dreamed of getting married at the Plaza. The Plaza Hotel in New York was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the country. I noticed William's slight wince at the mention of it, quickly masked by an indulgent smile. As the dinner progressed, I found myself increasingly uneasy. There was something off about the whole situation, but I couldn't identify exactly what was causing my discomfort. Was I just being an overprotective mother, reluctant to see another woman take center stage in my son's life? Or was there something genuinely concerning about Colette and her family? By the time I served dessert, a knot of worry had formed in my stomach. I tried to reassure myself that I was overreacting, but decades of teaching had honed my ability to read people. And something about Colette Dupont wasn't adding up. As the dessert soufflés were demolished with appreciative murmurs, I excused myself to fetch more wine from the kitchen. "I'll just be a moment," I said, gathering a few empty plates. "Please make yourselves comfortable." Once in the kitchen, I lingered longer than necessary, giving the Dupont family a chance to speak privately. I moved silently toward the doorway, separating the kitchen from the dining room, staying just out of sight. What I heard next would change everything. The moment they thought I was out of earshot, the conversation at my dining table switched from English to rapid-fire French. "Cette vieille vache laide," Colette said with a sneer in her voice I hadn't heard before. This ugly old cow. My body went cold at the insult, but I forced myself to remain still and listen. "Son fils est parfait pour notre plan," she continued. "Her son is perfect for our plan. Riche, naïf, et si facilement manipulable. Rich, naive, and so easily manipulated." Monsieur Dupont chuckled. "Tu es sûr qu'il a autant d'argent qu'il le prétend?" "Are you sure he has as much money as he claims, bien sûr?" Colette replied confidently. "Il est partenaire dans son cabinet d'avocat. Et regarde cette maison. Elle vaut une fortune dans ce quartier." Of course, he's a partner in his law firm, and look at this house. It's worth a fortune in this neighborhood. My hands began to shake as I realized what I was hearing. Colette wasn't in love with my son. She was targeting him for his money. "Combien de temps vas-tu rester mariée avant de demander le divorce?" Madame Dupont asked. "How long will you stay married before asking for divorce?" Colette laughed softly. "Juste assez longtemps pour obtenir ma carte verte et une partie de son héritage. Un an, peut-être deux. Just long enough to get my green card and part of his inheritance. A year, maybe two." "Et la mère?" Monsieur Dupont inquired. "And the mother, elle ne se doute de rien," Colette said dismissively. "Juste une vieille prof stupide. Elle sera probablement morte avant que nous finalisions tout." "She suspects nothing. Just a stupid old teacher. She'll probably be dead before we finalize everything." My blood ran cold. They were discussing my death as a convenient timeline for their scheme. "William m'a dit qu'elle n'a pas de testament," Colette continued. "Tout ira automatiquement à lui et donc à moi." William told me she doesn't have a will. Everything will automatically go to him and therefore to me. I had to grip the counter to steady myself. My own son had discussed my lack of a will with this woman. "Il ne se doute de rien?" Madame Dupont asked. "He doesn't suspect anything." Colette laughed again. "Il est comme une marionnette entre mes mains. Je dis saute et il demande combien haut. He's like a puppet in my hands. I say jump, and he asks how high, et s'il découvre la vérité. And if he discovers the truth?" Monsieur Dupont sounded concerned. "Impossible," Colette said confidently. "Il est trop amoureux, et de toute façon, tout sera légal. Un mariage, un divorce, c'est normal en Amérique." "Impossible. He's too in love. And anyway, everything will be legal. A marriage, a divorce, it's normal in America." I stood frozen in my kitchen, a bottle of wine forgotten in my hands. The beautiful, charming woman my son planned to marry was a predator, and William was her prey. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to rush into the dining room and expose her immediately, but some cooler part of my mind held me back. If I confronted them now with only my word against theirs, William might not believe me. He was so enchanted with Colette that he might dismiss my accusations as jealousy or misunderstanding. I needed to be strategic to protect my son without humiliating him. So I took several deep breaths, plastered a smile on my face, and returned to the dining room with the wine bottle. "Sorry for the delay," I said cheerfully in English. "I had a bit of trouble finding another bottle." They had seamlessly switched back to English, with Colette in mid-sentence about their wedding plans. "Nothing too elaborate, of course," she was saying to William, though her eyes told a different story. I poured wine with hands that I struggled to keep steady, noticing the way Colette's gaze lingered on the antique silver candlesticks on my table, mentally appraising their value. I saw how Monsieur Dupont studied the painting above my fireplace, an original my grandmother had purchased from a then-unknown artist who had since become famous. They were cataloging my possessions, my son's potential inheritance, and they thought I was completely oblivious. For the remainder of the evening, I watched and listened with new awareness. Every compliment Colette paid me now sounded hollow. Every time she touched William's arm possessively, I saw it for the calculated gesture it was. "You have such wonderful taste, Beverly," Colette said, eyeing my grandmother's diamond earrings. "Those must be family heirlooms." "Yes," I replied simply. "They'll go to William's wife someday." I watched her eyes light up with greed and felt sick to my stomach. "How thoughtful," she murmured, her hand unconsciously touching her bare earlobe as if already feeling the weight of those diamonds. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself torn between the desire to protect my son immediately and the knowledge that I needed evidence beyond my word. William was so deeply infatuated that a direct confrontation might only push him further into Colette's arms. So I smiled and hugged them all goodbye, including the woman who had called me an ugly cow and planned to break my son's heart after emptying his bank accounts. "We must do this again soon," I said pleasantly. "Perhaps next time in New York." "Wonderful idea." Colette agreed, her smile not reaching those calculating amber eyes. "And maybe we can talk about the wedding plans. I was thinking a June ceremony would be lovely." As I closed the door behind them, a single thought crystallized in my mind. I would not let this woman destroy my son's life. I had a plan to formulate and not much time to execute it. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Colette's voice dismissively calling me a stupid old teacher and discussing my death as a convenient timeline for her schemes. By morning, my shock had transformed into cold determination. I knew William would be hurt eventually, no matter what happened. The question was whether I could minimize the damage by acting now before wedding vows were exchanged and legal entanglements became more complicated. My first call was to my dear friend Marie Coleman. We'd taught together at Boston University for 20 years before she retired, and to everyone's surprise became a licensed private investigator. "I was tired of analyzing fictional mysteries," she'd explained. "Real ones are much more interesting." "Marie, I need your help," I said when she answered, professionally. "Beverly, what's wrong?" Her voice immediately shifted from casual to concerned. I explained the situation, detailing everything I'd overheard at dinner. Marie listened without interruption, and I could almost hear her taking notes. "So, you need me to investigate this Colette Dupont," she summarized when I finished. "Background check, previous relationships, financial history, immigration status, the works." "Exactly," I confirmed. "I need solid evidence before I approach William. He's completely besotted with her." "I'll start right away," Marie promised. "In the meantime, don't confront her. Let her think you're clueless." Over the next week, Marie worked her investigative magic. What she uncovered was even worse than I'd feared. "Beverly, this woman is a professional gold digger." Marie told me over coffee in my kitchen, spreading photographs and documents across the table. "Colette Dupont, whose real name is actually Sophie Moreau, has been married twice before, both times to wealthy older men." My stomach dropped. "William doesn't know." "Of course not. She legally changed her name after her last divorce. Her first husband was Maurice Beauchamp, a 62-year-old investment banker from Paris. They married when she was 24, divorced 3 years later with a settlement of 2 million euros. Marie pushed a wedding photo toward me. The bride was unmistakably Colette, though her hair was longer and blonde. The groom was clearly old enough to be her father. Husband number 2 was Richard Harrington, British tech entrepreneur, age 57. That marriage lasted 18 months before she filed for divorce, claiming emotional abuse. She walked away with a London apartment and approximately £3 million. Another wedding photo, this time with Colette sporting a sophisticated brunette bob. The pattern was unmistakable. "What about her parents?" I asked. Marie grimaced. "Not her parents. Jean and Elise Moreau are actually her uncle and aunt. Her real parents are both deceased. The three of them have worked this scam before posing as a respectable family to add credibility." "And her job?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She does work for an international law firm, but not as a lawyer. She's an administrative assistant in their Paris office, currently on leave. She has no legal training whatsoever. She targets wealthy men at professional conferences. William wasn't random. He was specifically selected after she researched partners at major U.S. law firms." I closed my eyes briefly, imagining how devastating this would be for my son. William had built his career on his intelligence and judgment. To discover he'd been so thoroughly deceived would be professionally embarrassing and personally heartbreaking. "There's more," Marie said gently. "She's been investigated twice for marriage fraud by immigration authorities in the UK, though charges were never filed, and her visa for the US expires in 3 weeks, hence the rush to the altar." "Thank you, Marie," I said, gathering the documents. "This is exactly what I needed." My next call was to Thomas Reynolds, a law school friend of my late husband, who specialized in estate planning. "Beverly, what a delightful surprise," he greeted me. "How are you holding up these days?" I explained my situation, leaving out the more personal details and focusing on protecting my assets. "I need to safeguard my estate without raising alarms. William thinks I don't have a will." Thomas was silent for a moment. "I see. Well, we have several options. A revocable trust would give you the most flexibility while protecting your assets from potential complications." We spent an hour discussing legal strategies. By the end of the call, I had a clear path forward for protecting my financial interests, regardless of William's marital decisions. Thomas promised to have documents prepared within days. My final investigative task was the most difficult. I reached out to Marcus Jenkins, one of William's colleagues at the law firm, whom I'd met at a holiday party years ago. "Mrs. Anderson," he said when I reached him, "this is unexpected." "Marcus, I need to ask you something about William and Colette," I began carefully. "How did they actually meet? William says it was at a conference, but I'm hearing conflicting stories." There was a pause on the line. "Well, they were both at the International Law Symposium, but—" He hesitated. "Please, Marcus, it's important." He sighed. "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Colette was actually working as a translator for the Devereaux case William was handling. She wasn't there as an attorney. William was quite taken with her and bent some rules to ask her out, which technically violated client confidentiality protocols. He could have faced an ethics review if it had been reported." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Colette had targeted my son from within his own case, using her temporary position to gain access to information about his financial status and professional standing. "Thank you, Marcus. This stays between us." By the end of the week, I had compiled a comprehensive file on Colette DuPont Sophie Moreau. My attorney had drafted protective legal documents. Now I needed to decide exactly how to approach my son with this devastating information. William called that weekend sounding happier than I'd heard him in years. "Mom, we're thinking about moving the wedding up. Colette's visa situation is getting complicated, and we don't want to risk her having to leave the country." My heart ached for him. "Actually, William, I was hoping to visit New York next weekend. Perhaps we could have dinner, all of us, including Colette's parents if they're still in town." "They are," he said, surprised but pleased. "That would be wonderful. Colette has been talking about how much she enjoyed meeting you." "I bet she has," I thought grimly. "Wonderful. Let's plan on Saturday evening, then." As I hung up the phone, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. I would need all my strength, all my composure, and all my love for my son to handle this situation with the delicacy it required. The following Saturday found me on a train to New York, a slim folder of evidence tucked into my handbag. I'd spent the week rehearsing exactly what I would say and how I would say it. The most important thing was to present the facts without emotion, allowing William to come to his own conclusions. William met me at Penn Station, wrapping me in a warm hug. "You look great, Mom," he said, stepping back to look at me. "New York agrees with you." "I'm just happy to see you," I replied honestly. My son's face showed no sign of doubt or unhappiness. He was still completely under Colette's spell. Colette has made reservations at Le Bernardin, he told me as we took a taxi to my hotel. Her parents are excited to see you again. I'm sure they are, I thought. That sounds lovely, was what I said aloud. How thoughtful of her. William dropped me at my hotel with plans to pick me up at 7 for dinner. As soon as I was alone, I called Marie for a final update. Nothing new, she reported, but I've compiled everything into a digital file as well. I've emailed it to you as backup. Thank you, Marie, for everything. That evening I dressed carefully in a simple black dress with the pearl necklace Robert had given me. I wanted to look elegant but not intimidating. This wasn't about outshining Colette. It was about saving my son. Le Bernardin was as exclusive and elegant as its reputation suggested. William and Colette were already seated at the table when I arrived along with Monsieur and Madame Dupont. Colette rose to greet me with her customary air kisses. "Beverly, how wonderful to see you again," she said, her accent somehow more pronounced than before. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Colette. It's good to see all of you again, too." Throughout the appetizer course, conversation remained superficial. Colette dominated the discussion with talk of wedding plans, which had apparently expanded significantly since our last meeting. "We're thinking the plaza, after all," she announced, touching William's hand possessively. "It's worth the expense for such a special day." I noticed William's slight wince at the mention of cost, but said nothing. "And we've been discussing your housing situation, Beverly," Colette continued smoothly. "William tells me you rattle around in that big house all alone. Wouldn't it make sense to sell it and move to something more manageable in New York, to be closer to us and your future grandchildren?" The predatory gleam in her eye was unmistakable to me now. She wanted my house sold and the proceeds accessible to William, which meant accessible to her. "It's a possibility," I replied noncommittally, "though there's a lot of family history in that house." "History is important, certainly," Monsieur Dupont interjected in his heavily accented English. "But sometimes the practical must take precedence, n'est-ce pas?" As the main course arrived, the Duponts and Colette once again switched to French, apparently confident in their privacy. "Elle a l'air encore plus vieille que la dernière fois," Madame Dupont commented. "She looks even older than last time." Colette smirked. "Plus tôt elle vend cette maison mieux c'est. William dit qu'elle vaut au moins 4 millions de dollars." "The sooner she sells that house, the better. William says it's worth at least $4 million. "Et après le mariage, tout sera à toi," Monsieur Dupont said with satisfaction. "And after the marriage, everything will be yours." "Exactement," Colette agreed. "J'ai dit à William que nous devrions commencer à chercher des maisons de retraite pour sa mère. Discrètement, bien sûr." "Exactly. I told William we should start looking at retirement homes for his mother. Discreetly, of course. I kept my face pleasantly neutral, sipping my wine and pretending to be absorbed in my meal. "Tu pensais qu'elle se doute de quelque chose?" Monsieur Dupont asked suddenly. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Colette glanced at me dismissively. "Cette vieille idiote jamais. Elle croit que je suis folle amoureuse de son précieux fils." This old idiot never. She believes I'm madly in love with her precious son. They continued in this vein throughout dinner, becoming increasingly bold in their discussion of plans for my son's money and my property. Colette even mentioned the specific Parisian neighborhood where she planned to buy an apartment once she had access to William's accounts. William, understanding nothing of this conversation, smiled indulgently at his fiancée, speaking her native language. By dessert, I had heard more than enough. It was time. "William," I said gently, "I'd like to say something to all of you." My son looked surprised but pleased. "Of course, Mom." I took a deep breath, arranged my face in a pleasant expression, and began speaking in English. "I want to thank you all for a lovely evening. It's been so illuminating to get to know you better." Then I switched to perfect Parisian French. "Mais je dois vous dire que j'ai compris chaque mot de vos conversations depuis notre première rencontre. But I must tell you that I have understood every word of your conversations since our first meeting." The shock on their faces was almost comical. Colette's wineglass froze halfway to her mouth. Madame Dupont actually gasped. William looked completely confused. "Je suis professeur de français à la retraite après 30 ans d'enseignement à l'université," I continued calmly. "I am a retired French professor after 30 years of teaching at the university." "Mom," William interrupted, "what's going on?" I held up my hand, asking for his patience, and continued in French. J'ai entendu comment vous m'appelez une vieille vache laide. Comment vous planifiez d'épouser mon fils uniquement pour sa carte verte et son argent? Comment vous comptez divorcer après avoir obtenu ce que vous voulez? I heard how you called me an ugly old cow, how you plan to marry my son only for his green card and his money, how you intend to divorce after getting what you want. Colette's face had drained of all color. C'est un malentendu, she stammered. It's a misunderstanding. Non, ce n'est pas le cas, I replied firmly, reaching into my handbag for the folder. Sophie Moreau, ou préférez-vous Colette Dupont maintenant? J'ai tout appris sur vos mariages précédents. Monsieur Beauchamp à Paris, Monsieur Harrington à Londres, tous les deux beaucoup plus âgés, tous les deux très riches, tous les deux divorcés rapidement après que vous ayez obtenu ce que vous vouliez. No, it's not. Sophie Moreau, or do you prefer Colette Dupont? Now I learned all about your previous marriages. Mr. Beauchamp in Paris, Mr. Harrington in London, both much older, both very wealthy, both divorced quickly after you got what you wanted. I turned to William, who was watching with growing horror. William, I'm so sorry. Colette isn't who she claims to be. She's been married twice before, both times to wealthy older men whom she left after securing substantial settlements. She's not a lawyer, she's an administrative assistant, and her parents are actually her aunt and uncle who help her run these scams. I slid the folder across the table to him. Everything is in here. Photos, marriage certificates, divorce settlements. I had her investigated after overhearing their conversation in French at my dinner party, where they openly discussed using you for a green card and your money. William's face had gone completely white. This can't be true, he whispered, but his eyes were already moving to the documents I'd provided. William, chérie, she's lying, Colette said desperately in English. Your mother is jealous, can't you see? William ignored her, flipping through the evidence, his lawyer's mind processing the facts. He stopped at a wedding photo from Colette's first marriage. This is you, he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. I can explain, Colette began, but William cut her off. And this, he held up the British marriage certificate. Sophie Moreau, that's your real name. The Duponts had fallen completely silent, exchanging nervous glances. Your visa expires in 2 weeks, I added quietly. That's why you've been pushing for a quick wedding. William turned to Colette, his expression hardening from shock to anger. Is any of it true? Do you even love me? Colette's demeanor changed instantly, the charm falling away like a discarded mask. You were an easy target, she spat. So desperate for love, so eager to believe a beautiful woman could want you for yourself. The cruelty of her words made me wince, but William's face showed only a cold fury now. Get out, he said quietly. All of you. William, Monsieur Dupont began, but my son cut him off. I said get out, now, before I call the immigration authorities about your niece's visa fraud attempts. Colette stood abruptly, grabbing her designer handbag. You'll regret this, she hissed at me. Nobody likes a meddling old woman. I'd rather be a meddling old woman than a predatory con artist, I replied calmly. The three of them stormed out of the restaurant, leaving William and me alone at the table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. My son stared at the evidence folder, his hands shaking slightly. I'm so sorry, William, I finally said. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't let her do this to you. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with pain and embarrassment. How could I have been so blind? Because you're a good person who sees the best in others, I told him gently. She specifically targeted you, researched you. This wasn't your fault. William shook his head slowly. I need some time to process this. I think I'd like to be alone tonight. Of course, I said, understanding his need for space. I'll be at my hotel if you need me. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, I hugged him tightly. I love you, William. I love you too, Mom, he replied, his voice breaking slightly. And thank you for saving me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I watched him walk away into the New York night, my heart breaking for his pain, but relieved that the truth had come out before vows were exchanged, and legal entanglements became infinitely more complicated. The 2 weeks following the confrontation at Le Bernardin were among the most difficult of my life. I returned to Boston the next day, leaving William to process everything in his own time. I texted him once to let him know I had arrived safely, and he responded with a simple, "Thanks, Mom." I respected his need for space, though every maternal instinct urged me to rush back to New York and comfort him. Instead, I channeled my energy into finalizing my estate plans with Thomas, ensuring that my assets would be protected for William's future benefit, regardless of his marital status. 14 days after I'd left New York, my phone rang with William's number. My heart raced as I answered. "William, how are you?" There was a long pause before he spoke. "You were right about everything," he said, his voice sounding tired but calmer than I'd expected. "I hired my own investigator to verify what you found. He uncovered even more. She's done this 5 times, not just twice, and she's already back in France." "I'm so sorry," I said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "She took some things from my apartment," he continued. "Jewelry cache, my grandfather's watch. The police say there's not much they can do since she's left the country." My blood boiled at the thought of this woman stealing family heirlooms after everything else she'd done. "William, I'll come to New York. You shouldn't be alone right now." "Actually," he said, "I was wondering if I could come to Boston for a few days. I've taken some time off work. I need to be somewhere that feels safe." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Of course, your room is always ready for you." 3 hours later, I was picking up my son at South Station. He looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders that broke my heart. When he saw me, something in his expression crumbled, and for a moment I saw the little boy who'd come to me with scraped knees and broken toys. "Mom," was all he said, before engulfing me in a tight hug. Back at home, we sat in the kitchen while I made his favorite meal, beef stew with dumplings. Gradually, William began to talk. "I keep replaying everything in my mind, looking for signs I missed," he said, staring into his mug of coffee. "There were so many. The way she never wanted to talk about her past in detail, how she steered conversations away from meeting her colleagues, her rush to get married." "Don't torture yourself," I advised gently. "Con artists are skilled manipulators. That's how they succeed." "But I'm a lawyer," he said bitterly. "I'm supposed to be good at reading people, at spotting inconsistencies. Instead, I was completely fooled." "You were in love," I reminded him. "Love can make it hard to see clearly sometimes." "I wasn't in love," he corrected, his voice hollow. "I was in love with an illusion, a carefully constructed facade designed to appeal to me specifically. The real woman, this Sophie, I never even met her." Over the next several days, William slowly began to heal. We took long walks through Boston Common, visited museums, and spent evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. I was careful not to push, allowing him to process his feelings at his own pace. One evening, as we sat in the living room sharing a bottle of wine, William brought up something that had clearly been weighing on him. "I told her about your house," he confessed, "about your finances, things I had no right to discuss. I'm so sorry, Mom." "You thought she was going to be your wife," I said. "It's natural to discuss family matters with the person you plan to spend your life with." "But I broke your trust," he insisted, "and I nearly let her manipulate me into pressuring you to sell your home." I reached over and took his hand. "William, you made a mistake. We all do. What matters is that you're learning from it." "How did you know to be suspicious?" he asked suddenly. "What tipped you off before you even heard them speaking French?" I considered the question carefully. Intuition partly, but also experience. When you've lived as long as I have, you develop a sense for when something isn't quite right. There was a disconnect between Colette's words and her actions. Her compliments seemed rehearsed. Her interest in my possessions was too intense. Little things that added up. William nodded slowly. "I need to trust my instincts more." "Yes," I agreed. "But don't let this experience make you cynical. There are wonderful, genuine people in the world. You'll find someone worthy of you." 6 months later, William was back on his feet professionally. The embarrassment of nearly being conned had initially made him withdraw from social activities at his firm, but gradually he'd regained his confidence. Our relationship had grown stronger through the ordeal with weekly phone calls and more frequent visits. As for me, I'd made some changes too. I finalized my will and estate plan, ensuring William's inheritance would be protected by a trust with specific provisions. I also began dating again, somewhat to my own surprise. It started when my friend Eleanor insisted I join her book club. There I met Richard, a widowed English professor with kind eyes and a quick wit. Our first coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into theater tickets, which evolved into a comfortable companionship that brought unexpected joy to my life at 58. On William's first visit after I'd started seeing Richard, he observed us together and later told me, "He looks at you like you hang the moon, Mom." That's how someone who truly cares should look at you. Coming from my son who had learned this lesson the hard way, the observation meant everything. Life continues to surprise me. What began as a painful deception transformed into a journey of growth for both William and me. He's more cautious now, but not closed off to love. I'm more aware of the need to protect what I've built, but also more open to new beginnings. Sometimes the most painful experiences teach us the most valuable lessons. Have you ever had your intuition save you from a potential disaster? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of deception and redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and new beginnings. Don't forget to share with someone who might need a reminder to trust their instincts. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to start a new chapter in your life story.